Hi everybody, Sean from Extra Star Wars here, bringing you a review of The Last Command, the final book in the Thrawn series, an EU masterpiece. So they tell me. What do I think of The Last Command? You'll just have to find out during this video. If you love Star Wars as much as I do, why don't you subscribe to the channel so you can join in on our discussions. Don't forget to like the video if you found it helpful. The Last Command is the third book in the Thrawn Trilogy, written by Timothy Zahn. Timothy Zahn is known as a great science fiction writer. He's been in the Star Wars universe in the EU. He's been in the Star Wars universe during the Disney era. I was told to read these three books because they are essentially a staple to the Star Wars universe. To recap, after book 1, I wasn't too impressed. After book 2, I was really impressed. And after book 3, well, you'll just have to continue watching to see what my thoughts are about it. Hey, did you read this trilogy? Let me know what you think in the comments below. So the way this video is going to work, I'm going to give you the overall story. I'm going to give you some sidebar opinions to it as I go on. And then I'm going to give you a character by character breakdown of my perception of this book. This book took me a while to get through between family time and kids and school and work and creating content and whatever. It took me a little bit to get through. So the story and the details may not all be there. I'm not going to Wikipedia. I'm not going to other YouTube videos for this review. I'm just going off my brain. Usually at the final parts of the book, I really hammer down and read the last 10 chapters right in a row. So all of that is fresh in my brain right now because honestly, the middle of the book is pretty much forgettable. I don't really remember what happens in the beginning of the book, but the end of the book and where all our characters go is kind of the most important aspect of this trilogy. So without further ado, here is the overall story of The Last Command. And of course, this is spoiler heavy, even though this book was written in the early 90s. Overall story. Thrawn continues the Empire offensive using his cloning technology left over by the Emperor at a secret location. The New Republic seeks to destroy the cloning facility through mutual agreements that is formed through New Republic forces, smugglers, the Nagiri, and natives of Wayland. Even with Thrawn's cunning and often impeccable strategy, he does not account for his personal bodyguard Rook to take him out in the final pages of the book. A wild card in the story, and probably a shoehorn detail, is Master Joruus C'baoth. Again, I don't know how to pronounce these names, and I'm not taking the time to look them up. Master C'baoth, who is found out to be a clone of the former Master, who then cloned Luke Skywalker from the cut-off hand from Bespin, named Luke with 2 U's Skywalker, who fought his actual self, but Luke was controlled by C'baoth, who was eventually defeated by Mara Jade, who has been out to kill Luke Skywalker since book 1. The story ends exactly how the story begins back in book 1, with New Republic forces cleaning up after the Empire is seemingly defeated. So, to some, nothing happens in this trilogy. The Empire is defeated at the explosion of Death Star 2. The New Republic comes to power in government. There are Empire factions around that need mopping up. There's different missions to do that. Thrawn appears as the Grand Admiral, as an unknown entity. During the OT, obviously, we didn't know that Thrawn was a thing. He takes over. He's very cunning. I really love Thrawn, to be honest with you. I think he is actually better used in New Disney, where he was placed in command of defeating the rebels of Lothal etc., and the TIE Striker program or whatever that TIE fighter he was working on. In this case, we have a single arc of Thrawn, which we'll get into a little bit later, and we'll break that down. But to be honest with you, this trilogy is not impressive to me. The middle book was probably the best one. The last book, it's not good, in my opinion. The last couple chapters were really good, but the whole book is kind of a snooze fest. Now let's move on to our character analysis of The Last Command. It's not going to include all the characters. In fact, it's going to include the characters that resonated with me the most. So I'm probably missing some smugglers and some secondary characters that had no meaning to the story. So let's start off with Luke Skywalker. This is going to be an unpopular opinion, but his journey takes him searching for answers to the Dark Jedi, working along Mara, but often asking philosophical questions. In reality, Luke does not have much character growth between Book 1 to Book 3. When he's up against himself, the Luke clone, and the Dark Jedi Saboth, he tries to talk down the Dark Jedi, trying to basically did what he did with Vader, which is fine because that's his character and it's no problem. His use of the Force, though, is normal. Really nothing special. He throws his lightsaber a few times, but oftentimes the Force was sort of like a static radio where it wasn't exactly clear. His use of the Force is normal and nothing special, as I mentioned, unlike what the crybabies have said about his misuse in The Last Jedi. I think Force projection is a pretty powerful use of the Force. But in this book and series, I don't think Luke had a significant role in his story arc, outside of trying to be recruited by a Dark Jedi, which sounds sort of familiar from a story that I may have watched a lot. Now let's talk about Mara Jade. Mara Jade is probably the character with the most growth, going from hating Luke Skywalker with venom to respecting him to helping him. Mara has worked all angles in the story. Her fiery attitude and brash personality is very cool. Luke tuning up her Force usage was welcome, and her knowledge of the former Empire was very intriguing. My favorite part is Mara telling the New Republic that the Emperor had these secret passageways in Coruscant that he would use to move around. At the end of the story, Luke gives away... Get ready, crybabies. At the end of the story, Luke gives away his former saber to her. The one from Bespin. The one that Rey ends up with. I bet if Luke on screen gave away his lightsaber, the coveted blue lightsaber, to Mara, that would probably cause a lot of conflict in today's Star Wars Twitter world. Princess Leia Organa Solo. Mother of twins now. There is some political action, but literally Leia has nearly zero impact on the story. Her role was being protected because of the story idea of her children being taken away from her from the Dark Jedi. She has a small role in the final chapters of the book, but she sort of just shows up and helps Mara out by throwing her thoughts to her through the Force, which is all fine and dandy, but was it needed? Probably not. Grand Admiral Thrawn. In my opinion, he really took a back seat in this story as his campaign was being played out, but what came as a big surprise was his death. I found his character to be completely underused in the story. He played with the Dark Jedi too much, and I'm saying Dark Jedi because I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. Joruus, Master Joruus. And I was shocked that Thrawn did not try to create a strategy to take him out. I don't know what the long play was with the Master Jedi. Thrawn sort of had all his angles covered, but with the Master Jedi, he like let that get away from him, and that's just very confusing. But his death, that was certainly surprising. I thought we were going to get him just retreating and regrouping, and there would be like an ongoing sort of character conflict with him, but he's dead, so that's interesting. Card is a character with a lot of layers. It's a decent smuggler who sees the New Republic as allies for the right price. His unification of the smugglers was a high point in this story for me. I did really enjoy that they would get together to sort of figure out how they can give information to the right people, and eventually they saw the Empire together as a collective being the greater evil, which is interesting because weren't they the greater evil in the first place? But I guess if you're getting paid by them, they're not so bad. Han Solo. Outside of normal Han character traits, he does not bring anything to this story outside of action hero. He's always in a conflict or a firefight, or he's laying out demolition. Han's story is exactly what we've seen before. It's flatter than a plateau. There's nothing there. Lando had little to no significance in this story. He is literally a subtweet of Han. Chewie! No significance in this story. Body protection, bodyguard. He's a subtweet of the New Republic team. Doesn't do anything in this story outside of guard doors and make things happen. At least in Aftermath, we had our team go back to Chewie's homeland to reconvene with his family. Aftermath being one of the first Disney canon books. R2-D2 actually had a little bit of significance in the story. He was given the task to figure out Wayland information when they landed on the mysterious planet. But that's about it. C-3PO helped translate natives on Wayland and inform Han and the team about things R2 found out about Wayland, aka the exact same thing they did on Endor. Now, Winter is an interesting character. She is an assistant to Leia. I thought she was going to be Delta Source, which was an informant for Thrawn inside the New Republic, like a mole. But Winter was an interesting character. She knows a lot. She can remember a lot. She was often watching the twins, though, but also performing lots of background duties for the New Republic. But toward the end of the story, she disappeared when Leia went off on her non-significant mission to Wayland to help / warn Han and Luke that the Master Jedi was there, even though they were already fighting the Master Jedi. It's a messy ending. Palion, who is Thrawn's right-hand man, we actually get lots of insights from Palion in this story. How he doesn't trust the Master Jedi or Rook or some of Thrawn's strategies. He's sort of working through that in his brain. And after Rook takes out Thrawn, he ends up calling for the retreat. And the Empire gets away, and it's really the last we hear of them. So Palion, through these books, really is a nice character. I think he's had almost like the most insight. I remember his conversations with Thrawn the most while reading it, even from book 1 to book 2 to book 3. Of course, we have the Master Jedi himself, Joruus. It was a little surprising to find out he was a clone, but not really at the same time. It seems like the idea of cloning was a big part of this story. The way I see it, though, in 2022, we had the clone. I saw Attack of the Clones. It was a movie, episode 2. So I saw that as my first instance of cloning. This book, probably groundbreaking in the cloning technology. You know, in the OT, where they're mentioned the Clone Wars, and then we get a book that's written between the prequels and the original trilogy about cloning. So probably for Star Wars fans who were yearning for stories, this was a really cool concept. The concept of taking DNA or whatever and soldiers and do a cloning, and they figured it out how to like sort of mask the Force so their brains would develop at a different pace. That was a little strange and mysterious, but interesting. They used this sort of salamander type of creature that deafens the Force, and that sort of was the great equalizer in this book against the Jedi, both good and bad. So the Thrawn Trilogy, you know, I got to take myself in two positions. Position A is this is the only story we had after the original trilogy. And in that case, it's great to see all the characters back. It's great to see the adventure. It's great to see some cool use of the Force, you know, with common, you know, lightning and throwing the saber and thoughts and whatever. It's great to have an introduction to Mara Jade. I think she's a really great character. I can see why people love her. I'm actually shocked they haven't used the concept, the idea of Mara Jade in today's Disney Plus canon. I think people would love that. On the other hand, I gotta treat it like this is the first time I'm reading it after knowing all the stuff I know, which is why the trilogy is a disappointment. There's nothing there that's exciting or new or different. Like, even in The Mandalorian, we get the idea of cloning, which eventually leads to somehow Palpatine returned. It sort of goes parallel with what's happening in The Last Command. Could the Emperor clone himself? Could he transfer his Force essence to another being? It all sort of works together. I think there's definitely flavors of parallelism between this trilogy and what's been happening in the Disney Plus series. I love that in our Ahsoka episodes, she mentions where's General Thrawn. You know, that's huge implications. Like I said earlier, Thrawn in Rebels is one of the best parts of Rebels. And for me, that was my first introduction to him. I had no introduction to him. I didn't know who this blue alien is. But then I read books, new canon books on Thrawn. I still have to finish what would have been equivalent to the Thrawn Trilogy. Not really equivalent. It actually goes into more detail of Thrawn's history with his people and how he got exiled and whatever. And that's a whole different video that I'm sure we'll do sometime in the future. But this book just seems to be very copycatty. You know, there's an enemy, there's a great Jedi. They have to defeat them. They have to mop up the Empire. And for what it is, it's fine. It took me a while to get through, which is not fine. But you know, it's just okay. Would I recommend it? Give it a read. I actually probably recommend listening to it at this point. I think the audiobook would have benefited me better because I get 45 minutes up and 45 minutes back, which would have covered a lot of the story for me in consecutive days versus fragmented. So I'm not completely down on the Thrawn Trilogy. I'm not impressed with the Thrawn Trilogy. Thrawn is exactly how he is in today's Disney canon, which is wonderful, except he's alive in today's Disney canon. So that's a positive. Hopefully they bring Mara Jade into the foray somehow. I don't know how they would do it at this point, but maybe there's potential there. Luke Skywalker is boring in this trilogy. I don't really see him being the great hero that people claim him to be. Leia, you know, has the twins. What happens with the twins? You know, I don't know that answer. I think I maybe know the answer just through pop culture references, but it's certainly not Ben Solo, and we all know how that turned out to be. Han and the rest of the crew are exactly the way they were in the original trilogy. Nothing's changed. I actually like Han's Force Awakens character because, you know, you see 30 years into the future, Han is literally doing the same things, which is hilarious. But at the end, he becomes the sacrifice. So you see a character change there. He's no longer selfish. He's selfless. Again, different conversation about the Force Awakens and how they dealt with those sequel trilogy characters. But The Last Command, just okay. Middle book, really good. Opening book, so-so. Now that I've read all three, I can officially say this trilogy was meh. at best. A lot of the EU lovers out there not going to enjoy this review, but I have to be honest with Star Wars and with anything. To compare, the Book of Boba Fett stinks, Mandalorian Season 2 rocks, Andor is amazing, Kenobi was vanilla. There's my review, all right? So just to be honest with you, I try to give it to you straight as much as I can. That's it for this video. We covered the Thrawn Trilogy, The Last Command. We talked about the overall story. We talked about the different characters. I gave you my honest opinion on it, and I hope that you will come back, you'll subscribe to the channel, you'll like this video, we'll start a discussion. Did I miss something in the book? Maybe you have different insights. I'd love to learn about it. We'll catch you next time on the Extra Star Wars channel. May the Force be with you as always, and we'll see you around.